The Malthari scout vessel Whisper of Dawn drifted through the void like a shard of broken crystal, its flowing organic hull shimmering with aurora, like energy currents. Commander Malvar stood motionless at the observation deck, his four-fingered hands clasped behind his back, watching the distant stars through the translucent membrane of the ship's bio. Glass the cosmos stretched before him, cold, indifferent, and vast. His people had mapped this sector centuries ago. It was supposed to be empty, yet now something was wrong. Thololan, the ship's lead scientist, approached with silent steps, her bioluminescent veins pulsing faintly in the dim light. "Commander," she murmured, her voice a whisper of ionized air, "the long-range scans have detected anomalies." Malvar did not turn. He already knew. The data had been gnawing at him for hours. "Show me," he said. Thololan gestured, and the air before them rippled as the ship's projection systems activated. A holographic star map unfolded, its familiar constellations marred by a cluster of foreign signatures. Not ships, not in the traditional sense. These were structures, massive and dormant, drifting in the dark like ancient tombs. Thousands of them. Malvar's secondary eyelids flicked shut for a moment, an instinctive reaction to the unease coiling in his chest. The Malthari had encountered cryogenic technology before, primitive stasis chambers used by lesser species to cheat time. But this was different. The scale was staggering. The design was wrong, angular where it should have been curved, brutal where it should have been elegant. The realization settled over him like a suffocating shroud. "Analysis," he asked, his voice carefully neutral. Thololan hesitated. "They are functional, but inactive. No energy signatures, no movement, just waiting." Malvar exhaled slowly. The Malthari High Council had dismissed humanity as a fractured, volatile species, too emotional, too reckless to be a true threat. They had watched from afar as the humans waged their petty wars, burned their own worlds, and clawed their way into the void with crude, inefficient technology. This was not the work of primitives. "Bring us closer," he ordered. The Whisper of Dawn glided forward, its organic engines humming softly. As they neared the nearest cryopod, the ship's scanners painted a detailed image across the viewport. The pod was massive, easily large enough to hold 100 beings. Its surface was pitted with micrometeorite scars, its edges worn by centuries of silent drift. And yet, it was intact. Thololan's breath hitched. "Commander, the structural integrity readings." "I see it." The pod's outer shell was reinforced with a composite material the scanners couldn't fully identify. Something dense, something resistant. The Malthari had alloys that could withstand stellar radiation. But this was built for something else. Built for war. A flicker of movement on the scanner made Malvar tense. One of the pods far in the rear of the formation had just registered a power surge. Status change. Thololan's voice sharpened. Energy spike in Sector 7. Before Malvar could react, the pod's outer casing split open with a soundless shudder. A plume of vapor escaped, dissipating into the void. Then, something emerged, but not like the angular utilitarian vessels the Malthari had observed in human space. This was sleek, predatory. Its hull was black as the void itself, its edges sharp enough to cut starlight. It moved without thrusters, gliding forward on some unseen propulsion system, and it was turning toward them. Malvar's pulse spiked. Evasive maneuvers. Now, the Whisper of Dawn banked sharply, its organic frame groaning under the strain. But it was too late. The human ship locked onto them. A single transmission crackled across the comms. A voice, rough and unmistakably human. "Unidentified vessel. You are trespassing in restricted space." Thololan's fingers trembled over the console. "Commander, their weapon systems." Malvar already knew. The scanners were screaming. Railgun batteries, plasma lances, something else. Something the system couldn't classify. He had made a mistake. They all had. Humanity hadn't just reached the stars, they had conquered them. And now, the Malthari were about to learn why the cryopods were never meant to open. The Whisper of Dawn shuddered as its engines strained against the unnatural pull of the human warship's gravity field. Malvar's claws dug into the command console, the bioluminescent panels beneath his fingers flickering with erratic pulses of violet energy. The Malthari vessel was built for silent observation, for slipping unseen between the stars. Not for this. Not for war across the bridge. The Lowland's frilled crest flared in distress, his 4 eyes darting between the holographic readouts. The human ship's energy signature was wrong. It didn't flow in the smooth, ionized currents of Malthari technology. It thrummed, a deep predatory resonance that made the very air vibrate. "Commander?" the Lowland whispered, his voice barely audible over the ship's panicked hum. "Their weapons. They're not just targeting us, they're tracking us." Malvar didn't need the confirmation. He could see it in the way the human vessel moved, effortless, precise, like a predator circling wounded prey. The whisper was fast, but not fast enough. Not against that. A new alert blared, a proximity warning. The human ship had closed the distance in a single terrifying lurch, its black hull blotting out the stars. Then, the transmission came again. "Final warning. Power down your engines and prepare to be boarded." The voice was calm, almost bored. Malvar's blood ran cold. The Malthari had studied humanity for centuries. They had watched their wars, their fractured nations, their reckless expansion into the void. They had dismissed them as primitive, emotional, chaotic. This was not chaos. This was control. The Lowland's hands trembled over the console. "They're deploying something, small craft, but not fighters. His voice hitched. "Cryopods." Malvar's breath caught. The human ship's underbelly had split open, revealing rows of sleek coffin-like capsules. They detached in perfect unison, drifting toward the Whisper on silent thrusters. "Not drifting." The Lowland's voice was hollow. "They're not boarding us, Commander. They're delivering something." Malvar knew. Then the cryopods weren't empty, and whatever was inside them, it was never meant to stay sealed. The first pod struck the hull with a sound like a dying star. Then the screaming began. The first cryopod struck the Whisper's hull with a sound like a dying star, a deep resonant tune that reverberated through the crystalline corridors of the Malthari vessel. The impact sent spiderweb fractures racing across the reinforced aerogel plating, glowing fissures of purple, white energy flickering, like dying embers before the structural integrity fields flared to life, sealing the breach. But it was already too late. The pod had embedded itself, its blackened surface steaming where it had fused with the Whisper's living metal. For a heartbeat, there was silence. Then the screaming began. Not from the pod, from the Malthari. Malvar's secondary heart pounded in his chest, his bioluminescent veins pulsing with alarm as the ship's neural network flooded his mind with damage reports. The cryopod hadn't just breached the hull, it had infected it. The pod's outer shell was dissolving, tendrils of black nanite fluid seeping into the Whisper's organic circuitry, rewriting its pathways with brutal efficiency. The ship shuddered, a pained, almost biological tremor, as if something inside it were being strangled. The Lowland's hands flew over the console, his silver-tinged fingers trembling. "Commander, the ship's nervous system is under attack. The humans, their tech isn't just mechanical, it's alive." Malvar didn't need the report. He could feel it. The Whisper was his, bound to his nervous system through the Malthari symbiotic link. And now, something foreign was inside it, something hungry. The pod's outer shell split open with a wet, organic crack. A human stepped out, not a soldier, not a warrior. Or at least, it should have been. The figure was clad in a form-fitting black exosuit, its surface rippling like liquid shadow. Its helmet was featureless, smooth as polished obsidian, reflecting the whisper's violet glow in distorted fragments. But the worst part, the part that made Malvar's secondary heart stutter, was the way it moved. Too smooth. It wasn't walking, it was unfolding, limbs extending with the eerie precision of a machine that had forgotten it was ever human. Then the helmet split, not along a seam. Like flesh, a vertical gash opened down the center, peeling back to reveal just a yawning void darker than the space between stars. Thalolan made a sound, a soft, broken noise, like a child, realizing the monster under their bed was real. The thing that had been human tilted its head. Then it spoke, not with a voice. With the whisper's own systems, the ship's comms crackled to life, broadcasting the words directly into Malvar's mind, the soundless voice scraping against his thoughts like a blade on bone. Major Jennifer Vala sends her regards. The cryopod's interior flexed, and then the real horror emerged. Not soldiers, not machines, dozens of them, small, pale figures in tattered cryo suits, their eyes hollow, their limbs too thin. They moved with the same unnatural precision as the first figure, their tiny hands clutching weapons that should have been too large for them. Malvar's blood turned to ice. The humans hadn't sent warriors. They'd sent orphans, and the orphans were smiling. The first child raised its weapon, a rifle that hummed with stolen Malthari energy, its core glowing the same violet as the whisper's heart. The last thing Malvar heard before the firing began was Thalolan's whisper, raw with horror. "Oh stars, they made them like us." Then the screaming started again, and this time it didn't stop. The Malthari command deck was a cathedral of failure. Malvar's claws scraped against the crystalline control panel, leaving thin silver scars in the bioluminescent surface. The air smelled of ionized panic, the scent of his crew's fear condensing into a metallic tang that clung to the back of his throat. The Whisper of Dawn had been designed for elegance, its flowing organic architecture, its aurora, lit corridors, its whispering energy currents that pulsed like a living thing. Now, it was a tomb in motion. The children were everywhere. They moved in silence, their hollow-eyed gazes sweeping across the Malthari crew with the detached precision of predators assessing prey. Their weapons, salvaged Malthari tech fused with human brutality, hummed with stolen power. The first boarding pod had been a distraction. The real assault had come from the vents, the maintenance shafts, the blind spots in the Whisper's elegant design. Humans didn't fight fair. They fought to win. Malvar's secondary heart stuttered as a proximity alert flared across the command console. The Whisper's central databanks were under siege, not by brute force hacking, not by the crude digital warfare the Malthari had expected, but by something far worse. Infiltration. Thalolan's voice was a rasp, his vocal cords strained from screaming. There inside the core, his silver-veined fingers trembled over the holographic display, where violet security protocols collapsed one by one under an unseen assault. Not just the ship, the network. They're rewriting our systems from within. Malvar's spines flattened against his skull. The Malthari datasphere was a masterpiece of organic computation, a living lattice of thought and memory woven into the ship's very bones. It should have been impossible to breach, yet the humans had done it. Not with superior technology, but with something far more terrifying. Adaptation. The first child had touched the core. Now the Whisper was learning to scream in a human voice. A console exploded in a shower of violet sparks. The deck lurched, gravity fluctuating as the ship's systems rebelled. Malvar's claws dug deeper into the panel, his mind racing. This wasn't warfare. This was desecration. The humans weren't just killing them. They were replacing them. Rewriting Malthari code with human instinct. Overriding centuries of crystalline logic with something raw and unfiltered. Thalolan gasped as a new alert pulsed across the screen. A single line of text, rendered in jagged Malthari script. But wrong. Somehow too sharp, too angry. Major Vala says, "Hello. Then, the lights died. The command deck plunged into darkness, the only illumination coming from the bioluminescent panic in Malvar's own veins. Somewhere in the black, a child laughed, a sound like breaking glass. The whisper of dawn was no longer theirs, and the humans were just getting started. Section Fae. The wrong numbers. The whisper of dawn had become a tomb of living light. Malvar's breath came in ragged, ionized gasps as he stumbled through the wreckage of the command deck, his claws scraping against the once pristine crystalline floors. The air tasted of burnt ozone and something else, something organic, something wet. The scent of human sweat, of copper, rich blood, of the crude, unfiltered stink of mammalian life. It clung to the walls, seeped into the ship's veins, replacing the delicate ionization of Malthari atmosphere with something thick and suffocating. A flicker of movement in the dark. His secondary eyelids snapped shut reflexively as a flare of violet, white energy arced across the ceiling, illuminating the ruin of his ship. The walls pulsed like a dying heart, their bioluminescent veins now laced with jagged fractures, glowing an angry red where human code had overwritten Malthari systems. The sight made his stomach churn. It was wrong, like watching a corpse twitch with another creature's nerves. Then he saw her, a human, the human Major Jennifer Vala. She stood silhouetted against the wreckage of the main view screen, her posture relaxed, almost casual. Her armor was scarred from plasma burns, the matte black surface webbed with cracks where Malthari weapons had grazed her. But she was unhurt, unbroken, and worst of all, unafraid. Malvar's spines flared in instinctive threat display. But she didn't react. She just watched him, her dark eyes reflecting the dying light of his ship, like twin pools of liquid void. Behind her, something moved, a Malthari child. Malvar's breath hitched. The youngling, no older than 3 solar cycles, clung to Vala's leg, its tiny claws tangled in the fabric of her combat suit. Its bioluminescent markings flickered erratically, pulsing in time with the ship's failing systems. But it wasn't screaming. It wasn't even afraid. It just stared at him, its wide, luminous eyes filled with something Malvar couldn't name. The realization struck him like a plasma round to the chest. The child trusted her. Vala's hand rested lightly on the youngling's head, her fingers brushing the delicate crest of its cranial spines in a gesture that was unmistakably protective. Malvar's mind reeled. This was the same species that had just butchered his crew, that had torn through his ship's defenses like they were made of paper. The same creatures who had weaponized laughter against them. She had saved one of his own. A low, guttural sound escaped Malvar's throat, half growl, half whimper. He didn't understand. None of this made sense. Humans were supposed to be monsters, animals. They didn't spare. They didn't protect. Vala tilted her head, studying him. Then slowly, she reached into a compartment at her hip and withdrew something small and metallic. A medkit, human design, crude by Malthari standards, but functional. She tossed it at his feet. Malvar didn't move. "Your scientist," Vala said, her voice quiet but carrying through the ruined deck. "Thalolan has alive for now." Malvar's spines flattened against his skull. A trap it had to be. Vala exhaled, a sound almost like amusement. "We're not here to slaughter children. Commander, even yours." The youngling chirped softly, pressing closer to her leg. Malvar's vision blurred. Somewhere in the ship's dying systems, a console sparked, casting jagged shadows across the deck. For the first time in his life, Malvar felt something he had never expected to feel toward a human, because in that moment, he realized the truth. The humans weren't just better at war. They were better at mercy too, and that terrified him more than any weapon ever could. The medkit lay between them like an accusation. Malvar stared at it, the human-made casing dull against the Malthari deck's bioluminescent glow. His claws twitched, but he didn't reach for it. Every instinct screamed that this was a deception, some human trick, a psychological gambit to weaken him before the killing blow. But the child chirped again, its tiny fingers clutching the human's leg. Major Vala didn't move. She stood there, battered armor still humming with residual energy from the battle. Her visor cracked, just enough to reveal eyes that held no triumph, only exhaustion, and something else. Malvar's spines flared involuntarily. Pity was worse than hatred. Hatred, at least, was honest. A shudder ran through the ship as another power conduit failed, the crystalline walls dimming further. The air smelled of ionized plasma and something acrid, human blood perhaps, or Malthari. It didn't matter now, his scientist, his responsibility. Malvar's mandibles tightened. He had watched the humans for decades, studied their wars, their reckless expansion. He had seen them fight like cornered beasts, teeth bared against the void. But this was something else. A human standing in the wreckage of his ship, offering aid. It made no sense. Vala shifted slightly, her armor's servos whining. "Your scientist bleeding out," she said, voice low. "That kit's got coagulants. Malthari compatible. We've been studying your biology." The admission should have sent fury through him. Instead, it settled like ice in his veins. They had prepared for this, not just for war, but for after. His youngling, whimpered. Malvar bent, claws closing around the medkit. The casing was warm where the human had held it. He turned without a word, moving toward the ruined science alcove, where Thalolan lay slumped against a shattered console. The Malthari scientist's silver, veined skin was pale, his breathing shallow. A jagged shard of crystalline hull plating had speared through his lower torso, the wound leaking violet ichor in slow, pulsing rivulets. Malvar knelt, cracking open the medkit. Inside, the tools were undeniably human, crude, blocky, designed for hands without claws. But the vials of coagulant gel were labeled in both human script and Malthari glyphs, always prepared. He worked in silence, applying the gel with hands that trembled only slightly. Thalolan's breath hitched as the coagulant sealed the worst of the bleeding, his bioluminescent markings flickering weakly. Behind him, Vala hadn't moved. Malvar didn't look back. Why? The word was raw, stripped of rank, of pride. Just a question, the human exhaled. "Because we've been where you are." A console sparked, casting her shadow long and jagged across the deck. "We know what it's like," she continued, "to lose everything. To fight just to keep breathing." Her helmet tilted slightly toward the youngling. "And we know what it's like to fail them." The ship groaned around them, a dying beast. Somewhere deep in its gut, the containment fields were failing, the cores purple. White energy bleeding into the corridors in erratic surges. Malvar's claws tightened around the empty coagulant vial. He had thought he understood humans, their violence, their stubbornness, their refusal to kneel. But this quiet, terrible mercy was something his people had never accounted for. Thalolan's breathing steadied. The youngling chirped again, pressing closer to Vala, and Malvar, for the first time in his life, felt the weight of a truth he could not unsee. The humans weren't just surviving. They were remembering, and that made them infinitely more dangerous than he had ever imagined. The Malthari ship shuddered again, its crystalline spires fracturing under the strain of dying containment fields. Purple-white energy arced through the corridors like veins of lightning, illuminating the jagged scars of battle. The air smelled of ionized metal and something deeper, the acrid tang of fear, of a vessel bleeding out in the void. Malvar watched as the human soldier, Corporal Cross, adjusted the makeshift brace around Thalolan's shattered carapace. His movements were precise, efficient, yet there was something else in them. A hesitation, a care that should not have existed between predator and prey. The youngling nestled against Vala's armored chest, let out a soft, trilling whimper. Its bioluminescent markings flickered erratically, mirroring the failing ship. Vala's helmet turned toward the corridor ahead, where the shadows pulsed with unstable energy. They should have left us to die. The thought coiled in Malvar's mind like a venomous thing. It would have been cleaner, more logical. The Malthari had hunted humans across the stars, glassed their colonies, shattered their fleets. And yet, here they stood, not as conquerors, not as executioners, but as Cross finished securing the brace and stepped back, his visor reflecting the fractured light. No words passed between them. None were needed. Then the ship screamed. A surge of energy ripped through the deck, sending Thalolan sprawling. The youngling shrieked, its claws digging into Vala's armor as she braced against the wall. Malvar barely kept his footing, his spines flaring in instinctive alarm. The scanners had gone dark hours ago, but he didn't need them to know what was coming. The containment breach had reached critical, and something else was moving in the dark. Vala's rifle snapped up, its targeting array painting a crimson line down the corridor. Cross mirrored her, his stance low, ready. Malvar's blood ran cold. He had seen humans fight before, reckless, brutal, a storm of bullets and fury. But this was different. This was calculated. The first drone emerged from the shadows, its segmented body gleaming like polished obsidian. A Malthari hunter, killer, one of the autonomous units designed to purge survivors from crippled vessels. Its mandibles flexed, tasting the air. Then it lunged. Vala fired. The shot wasn't a wild spray of plasma, or the crude kinetic bursts the Malthari had come to expect. It was a single, hyper-accelerated round, punching through the drone's central processor with surgical precision. The machine crumpled mid-leap, its limbs spasming as it crashed to the deck. But more were coming. Malvar heard them now, the skittering of dozens of articulated limbs, the hum of charging energy weapons. The ship's failing systems had triggered the purge protocol, and the humans were standing between the drones and the wounded. Cross moved first, his rifle barking in short, controlled bursts. Each shot found its mark, severing neural linkages, overloading power cores. Vala covered his flank, her weapon cycling through targets with inhuman speed. Malvar had witnessed Malthari warriors in combat, elegant, disciplined, their strikes flowing like liquid silver. This was not that. This was efficiency. Every movement, every shot was stripped of waste. The humans fought like machines that had learned to think, to adapt mid-stride. A drone lunged from above, Cross sidestepped, firing upward without looking, his round shearing through its thorax. Another came from the side. Vala pivoted, her boot crushing its sensor array before putting a round through its core. They weren't just surviving, they were hunting. A shadow detached itself from the ceiling, massive and silent. A Malthari heavy enforcer, its carapace reinforced with ablative plating, its forelimbs tipped with molecular disruptors. It landed between the humans and the wounded, its faceless helm turning toward Thalolan and the youngling. Malvar's breath caught. The enforcer raised its disruptor, and Vala moved. She crossed the distance in a blur, her armored fist slamming into the enforcer's chest with enough force to crack its plating. The impact sent the machine staggering, but before it could recover, Cross was there, his combat knife flashing as he drove it into the gap between armor segments. The enforcer thrashed, its limbs flailing, and Vala put her rifle against its helm and pulled the trigger. The explosion of sparks and ichor painted the walls in flickering violet. The youngling trembled, its tiny claws still hooked into Vala's armor. Thalolan stared, his respiratory vents flaring in shock. And Malvar understood. The humans had not come to save them out of weakness. They had come because they chose to, and that made them more terrifying than any weapon. The ship groaned again, the lights flickering toward final darkness. Vala turned her helmet toward the exit. Time to go. No hesitation, no doubt. just the unshakable certainty of predators who had decided, for this moment, to be something else. Malvar followed, and for the first time in his life, he felt the weight of something he could not name. Something like hope. The corridors of the dying Malthari vessel groaned like a living thing in its death throes. Bioluminescent panels flickered, their aurora hues dimming into bruised purples as power conduits bled out in crackling surges. The air tasted of ionized metal and something darker, burning flesh, spilled coolant, the acrid tang of ruptured containment cells. Vala moved like a storm given form. Her armored boots crushed shattered crystalline debris underfoot, each step deliberate, each motion honed by years of war. The youngling clung to her, its tiny claws hooked into the reinforced plating of her shoulder guard. It made no sound, neither did she. Behind them, Malvar kept pace, his own wounds a dull, throbbing ache beneath his carapace. He had fought in 100 battles, commanded fleets that darkened the void with their numbers. Yet now he followed a human, not out of fear, not out of obligation, because she had turned back for the youngling, and that defied every doctrine of war he had ever known. Thololan stumbled, his thin limbs trembling as he struggled to keep up. His scientific mind raced, trying to reconcile the impossibility before him. The humans were supposed to be reckless, violent, unpredictable, yet here they were, carving a path through the wreckage with terrifying efficiency, pausing only to ensure none were left behind. A tremor shook the ship. The ceiling above them split open with a sound like a dying star, revealing the skeletal ribs of the vessel's superstructure. Beyond it, space. Cold. Vala didn't flinch. She adjusted her grip on her rifle, the weapon's power core humming softly, a predator's purr. Not the failing glow of the Malthari ship, but something new. A beam of white. Hot energy speared through the darkness, carving a molten path through the collapsing corridor. Thololan recoiled, his sensory pits burning from the intensity. Malvar's instincts screamed. Weapons fire. But Vala didn't raise her rifle. She tilted her head, and then she smiled. A new shape emerged from the glare, resolving into a silhouette that made the Malthari's blood run cold. A human warship, not one of their sleek, angular vessels. No, this was something else. It loomed like a mountain cast in steel, its hull a patchwork of scars and fresh welds, its prow a blunt instrument of war. Along its flanks, gunports yawned open, revealing rows of cannons that glowed with barely restrained energy, and emblazoned across its armored belly, a black gauntlet clenched into a fist. Thololan's translator implant stuttered before supplying the meaning. Blackwatch, Malvar had heard the name before. Whispers in the dark, a human faction so ruthless even their own kind feared them, and they were here. The warship's ventral bay eye-rised open, revealing a cavernous maw of flickering red light. A single figure stood at the threshold, clad in armor darker than the void itself. A human male, his face, a map of old scars, his eyes 2 chips of ice. He raised a hand. Not in greeting. In acknowledgement, Vala nodded back, and in that moment, Malvar understood. This was not rescue. This was retrieval. The humans had come for their own. And by some unfathomable mercy, they had decided the Malthari were worth bringing with them. The ship shuddered again, the groan of metal reaching a crescendo. Vala didn't wait. She stepped into the light. Malvar hesitated, then followed, into the belly of the beast. The air inside the human warship tasted of ozone and cold iron. Malvar's respiratory membranes stung as he stepped across the threshold, his bioluminescent markings dimming in the oppressive red glow of the vessel's interior. The walls pulsed like living tissue, ribbed with conduits that throbbed with a deep, rhythmic hum. Not the elegant, flowing energy currents of Malthari architecture. This was something hungry, something built not to sustain, but to consume. Behind him, Thololan clutched her child closer. her crystalline skin flickering with distress. The infant's faint aurora patterns had dulled to near invisibility, its energy reserves depleted. Malvar knew the signs. They were dying. The human in the black armor, Corporal Stephen Cross, his insignia declared, moved ahead without a word. His boots struck the deck, plating with a weight that seemed to resonate deeper than sound, as if the ship itself recognized his passage. Then the screaming started. It came from deeper within the warship. A chorus of raw, animal terror, not human, not Malthari. Something else, something broken. Malvar's pulse quickened. His people had theorized about human black sites, facilities where the boundaries of science and suffering blurred. But to hear proof of it here, in the belly of this monstrous vessel, a hand clamped onto his shoulder. Major Vala stood beside him, her expression unreadable. "Don't ask," she said softly. "You don't want to know." The corridor opened into a vast chamber, its ceiling lost in shadow. Rows of cryopods lined the walls, their frosted glass glowing with a sickly green light. Some were empty, some were not, and some were moving. Thololan made a sound, a keening, fractured note that scraped against Malvar's nerves. One of the pods had cracked open, its occupant slumped forward, their body a grotesque fusion of flesh and machinery. Wires snaked from their spine, their limbs twitching in erratic, uncoordinated spasms. Their face, what remained of it, was locked in a silent scream. "Harvest protocols are still active," Cross muttered, tapping a command into his wrist display. The pod hissed shut, sealing the thing inside once more. "Well, purge the corrupted units later." Malvar's stomach turned. Units Vala moved to a control console, her fingers flying across the interface. "We need to stabilize them first," she said, jerking her chin toward Thololan and the child. "Your species' energy signatures are incompatible with our med bays. But the cryo chambers can slow cellular decay long enough for us to synthesize a treatment." Thololan balked, her tendrils coiling tight around her offspring. "You would put us in those?" Her voice trembled with revulsion. Vala's gaze flicked to the occupied pods, then back. "Not like them," she said. "You'll be asleep. You won't feel a thing." A lie. Malvar could see it in the tightness around her eyes. There was no guarantee, but what choice did they have? The child's aurora flickered again, weaker this time. Thololan closed her eyes and nodded. Cross stepped forward, guiding them toward an isolated pod at the chamber's edge. As the glass sealed shut, Malvar watched the pale violet light of Thololan's bioluminescence, dim beneath the frost. A chime sounded from Vala's calm. She listened, then exhaled sharply. "We've got company." Malvar didn't need to ask. The Malthari fleet had arrived, and the humans, merciless, monstrous, merciful, would now decide if they were worth protecting. The ship's engines growled to life, a sound like a beast baring its teeth. Harvest mode was over. Now came the hunt. The Indomitable shuddered as its engines roared to full power, the vibration thrumming through the deck like the growl of a waking predator. The Malthari fleet had arrived, not as saviors, but as executioners. Their ships cut through the void in perfect formation, their flowing organic hulls shimmering with aurora, lit energy, their weapon arrays pulsing with the cold, methodical precision of a species that had never known defeat. Malvar watched them on the tactical display, his crystalline fingers tightening around the edge of the console. The Malthari did not negotiate, they did not retreat, and they did not forgive. Across the bridge, Major Vala stood motionless, her gaze locked on the same screen. Her expression was unreadable, but Malvar had spent enough time among humans to recognize the tension in her posture, the coiled readiness of a soldier weighing an impossible choice. Thololan and the child were still frozen in their cryopod, their bioluminescence muted beneath layers of ice. They would not wake to see this battle. They might never wake at all. A chime sounded, another transmission from the Malthari flagship. Vala ignored it, Instead, she turned to Cross. "Prep the Havoc torpedoes." A beat of silence then. "Ma'am, now, Corporal." Cross hesitated only a second before his hands flew across the console. The ship's weapon systems flared to life, targeting solutions flickering across the display. Malvar's breath caught. The Havoc series were not standard armaments. They were something worse, something the Malthari had never encountered. Warheads designed not just to destroy, but to unmake. The first Malthari vessel opened fire, a stream of purple-white energy lancing toward the Indomitable. The human ship's shields flared, absorbing the impact, but the force of it sent tremors through the hull. Vala didn't flinch. The torpedoes launched, silent, sleek, and utterly lethal. They streaked toward the Malthari fleet, their trajectories weaving through the void like living things. The first detonation was blinding. Space itself seemed to warp around the impact. The Malthari ship's crystalline hull buckling inward as if crushed by an invisible hand. Then, it ripped apart, the elegant flowing architecture dissolving into shattered fragments. Its energy signature snuffed out like a candle in vacuum. The second torpedo struck before the Malthari could react. Another ship vanished, its destruction so total it left no debris, only a fading distortion in the fabric of reality. Malvar's mind reeled. This was not warfare as he understood it. This was annihilation. The remaining Malthari vessels faltered, their formations breaking as their commanders struggled to comprehend what had just happened. They had come expecting to crush a rogue human vessel, to reclaim their lost kin and erase the evidence of their failure. They had not expected this. Vala's voice cut through the silence. "Send them a message." Cross glanced up. "What do you want to say?" She didn't hesitate. The Malthari did. Their ships turned, their graceful organic curves twisting in desperate retreat, their energy signatures flaring as they burned toward the nearest jump point. Malvar watched them go, his chest tight. He had spent his life believing his people were untouchable, that their technology, their discipline, their superiority made them invincible. Now, he knew the truth. Humans did not fight for glory. They did not fight for conquest. They fought for each other, and that made them the most terrifying force in the galaxy. The bridge was silent save for the hum of the engines. Vala exhaled slowly, her shoulders sagging just slightly, the only sign of the weight she carried. Then she turned to Malvar. "Now," she said quietly, "let's see if we can wake your people up." The cryopods waited, their glass frosted with cold, and somewhere inside them, the Lolan and the child still clung to life. The cryopods hissed as the seals broke, releasing plumes of frozen vapor that curled like spectral fingers across the deck. Malvar's breath caught in his throat as the first pod's inner casing slid open, revealing the still form of the Lolan. Her violet skin was pale, almost translucent, the delicate ridges of her cranial crest frosted with ice. The biosigns flickered weakly on the display, a heartbeat so slow it was nearly undetectable, her respiration shallow as the stasis field relinquished its hold. Vala moved before Malvar could. Her gloved hands adjusted the medical readouts with practiced precision, her voice low but firm as she called for a trauma team. Behind her, Corporal Cross was already at the second pod, his broad frame blocking the child from view as he worked the manual release. The human soldiers moved with an efficiency that bordered on reverence. No wasted motion, no hesitation. They had done this before. Malvar realized, with a chill, that they had practiced for this moment. The Lolan stirred. Her eyelids fluttered, the bioluminescent veins beneath her skin pulsing, faintly as warmth returned to her limbs. When her gaze focused, it was not on Malvar, but on the human commander kneeling beside her. Vala's face was unreadable behind her visor, but her voice was soft. "Easy, you're safe." Thalolin's fingers twitched, her lips parting as if to speak, but no sound came. Instead, her eyes darted past Vala, searching. Cross stepped aside, revealing the child cradled in his arms. The small Malthari was awake, blinking in confusion, their tiny hands clutching at the thermal blanket wrapped around them. Thalolan's breath hitched, a sound so raw it cut through the hum of the ship systems. Cross didn't speak. He didn't need to. He simply knelt, offering the child to Thalolan with a gentleness that belied the blood still streaked across his armor. Malvar watched, something tightening in his chest. This was not the act of conquerors. This was something else entirely. The transmission was sent 3 hours later. Vala had allowed Malvar to compose it himself. No oversight, no censorship. The Malthari commander stood before the holocom array, the weight of his words pressing against his ribs like a blade. "High Command," he began, his voice steady despite the tremor in his hands. "This is Malvar of the 7th Fleet. The humans have taken the station. They have taken the cryopods." A pause. The recording light pulsed, waiting. "And they have given them back." He exhaled. The truth was a bitter thing, but it was all he had left. They could have killed us. They could have left us to die. Instead, they saved Thalolan. They saved the child. They saved me. Another pause. The silence stretched, thick with implication. We were wrong about them. We thought them weak because they feel. We thought them reckless because they fight for more than victory. But that is their strength. That is what makes them unstoppable. He reached for the console, his fingers hovering over the encryption key. "Do not make the same mistake I did." The transmission ended. Vala found him later, standing at the observation deck, staring into the void. The stars stretched endlessly before them, cold and indifferent. "They'll listen to you," she said quietly. "A Malthari commander's word carries weight. Malvar didn't turn, or they will call me a traitor." Maybe Vala shrugged, "But you sent the truth. That's all you can do." For the first time since the battle began, Malvar laughed, a short, sharp sound. "You humans, you fight like demons, then preach about truth." Vala's lips quirked. "We're full of surprises." The silence that followed was comfortable. Somewhere behind them, Thalolan and the child slept. Their heartbeats steady, their breaths even. The cryopods were empty, and the galaxy would never be the same.